So today we're going to have a change of pace. I guess the last few calls we focused mostly on presentations of different solutions. So we thought we'd kind of change the pace today and do something a bit different. So today Brian is going to moderate a discussion on governance. So hopefully, yes, if everyone can contribute, that'd be great. We just want to have an open discussion this week, maybe kind of talk about some of the ideas that have been thrown out over the last few weeks, you know, but particularly in the context of governance. You know, so we want to talk about on-chain voting. Is that a problem? You know, will liquid staking impact that? You know, obviously there's been some cases recently with exchanges interfering with on-chain governance. So I guess people will have some opinions on that. So yeah, we'll just focus on that for the whole discussion, and then I think at the end, then we'll kind of have we'll just kind of agree the next steps then at the end of the call. But I'll hand it over to Brian now to lead that discussion. All right, Brian.
Yeah, just 1 second. All right. Let me see, where is this? Yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit about governance in the context of liquid staking. So just to take a little step back. So, you know, what is governance, right? So governance basically refers to, you know, the processes around how to change sort of the rules of a network. You know, these are, of course, various things like network parameters, you know, what kind of functions go into a network, you know, and, you know, traditionally blockchains have relied on off-chain governance. So like we've had kind of governance in, I would say, maybe in a few places they've primarily resided. If you think of like a traditional proof of work chain, I mean, on the one hand, you have miners, and miners would have a lot of influence on governance by deciding which software to run. Another place where you've had a lot of governance rights would be with GitHub repos. So, you know, like, for example, you have the Bitcoin core repo, and there's been a lot of power associated with, you know, who has the merge, you know, kind of authority to merge changes to that. And, you know, it's often been controversy about removing people, adding people to that. And, you know, various people have tried to do different implementations of it, but, you know, generally they haven't been successful. And there's really one version that people have, you know, have been running. And, you know, even in Cosmos, right, we recently had the discussion, I don't know if some people saw that on in the Cosmos VIP Telegram channel, where it was around, you know, who has commit access to Cosmos SDK. Oh, what's going on? Yeah. And then I would say the third place where we had governance rights in traditional systems would be exchanges, right? So like, let's say in the case of a hard fork, an exchange can also decide, you know, which one is going to be sort of, you know, the real one, which one gets like an example was in the Bitcoin hard fork, when around the block size debate, there was kind of controversy around, you know, Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, and which one's going to be called BTC and get that ticker. And that's where exchanges also have a lot of power. So governance, of course, is always part of any blockchain system. But, you know, what we saw in the past was that governance was kind of often messy, intransparent, inefficient. I don't know how many of you here were sort of part or followed the Bitcoin block size debate, but this was like several years and a huge amount of controversy that went into this thing. And, you know, in the end, it was still kind of unclear what actually most people wanted. So there was obviously challenges with traditional blockchain governance approaches, not least that the processes can be like complicated, they lack transparency, you know, they're kind of prone to being controlled by like a few insiders. As a normal user, you can't really participate. So there's lots of reasons to to kind of see the problems with traditional blockchain governance systems. So what we've had is new chains, right? They have often, not always, but most of the new blockchains, right, have some sort of on-chain governance mechanisms. And I think there are various reasons for that, right? To increase efficiency, participation, transparency, maybe security of these decision-making processes. Examples of Tezos, right? Tezos was one of the earliest blockchains. I think the Tezos white paper is probably 2014 or something, where they emphasized very much governance. Today we have systems with on-chain governance that include Cosmos, Tezos, some other, some of the older chain that are like hybrid proof of work, proof of stake, like Dash and Decred. And other new ones that are launching too have some kind of on-chain governance, like Polkadot and Celo. And the most common mechanism is some sort of coin voting, right, where each coin is basically one vote. Often that's restricted to coins that are being staked. Now, there are differences as well, right? Like in particular, Tezos, it's only the bakers that vote, and there's a normal token holder, you can't vote. So that's a difference in Tezos. But, we can kind of focus maybe a little bit on Cosmos here, since, I think that's the system that most of you here will know best. And, it's also a system that's getting replicated in many other chains are copying also this governance functionality. So where are we today with this on-chain governance? I mean, if you look at the results, it depends a little bit, right? So we look at Cosmos, I would say the results look pretty good so far. It's functioned in the sense of coordinating chain upgrades. It was useful in getting some sort of sense of the opinion of the community. Let's say with the 0% commission validators, right? Like people could kind of voice their feedback. There haven't been really much. I mean, there's been some maybe somewhat controversial decisions, but mostly it's functioned pretty well. Tezos seems also to have functioned well, although I think there's probably been even fewer decisions there and less controversial than Cosmos. So far so good on that end. But some other ones I think have had more struggle. EOS in particular had, there's been, I don't know how many people have read that, but there are a few articles and we can maybe put them in the notes later, of EOS where you've basically had, exchanges basically voting for the block producers and using kind of customer funds to control the block producers and then sort of like usurp governance. I'm not super familiar with the details on EOS, but that's kind of on a high level, I think, what happened there. And recently there was a big debate around Steam, where also exchanges and Tron and Trusted Sun have basically kind of tried to take over the network. Again, I'm not really part of the Steam community, so I'm not super familiar there. But you can already see there are a bunch of examples where especially exchanges end up having a tremendous control over the governance process, and then use that kind of for their interests, which don't necessarily align with the community's interests. So one of the, but yeah, so just to kind of recap where we are today, right? So on-chain governance, I think, is very promising. In particular, what's promising is that you can get to a decision. Maybe the decision is good, maybe it's bad, but at least you can get to a decision, pretty quickly and pretty efficiently. So we will not see the kind of, stuck situation for years that maybe you had in Bitcoin with the block size thing. And I think we also won't have as much as a bias towards kind of, just sticking with the status quo that we had in Bitcoin, where I think it's, it's basically become almost impossible to make a significant change to Bitcoin. And, that can be maybe a great benefit for Bitcoin because, it's one of the value propositions for Bitcoin that, it's digital gold, it won't change. But I think for many blockchains, actually adaptability is something they want. So then that's not a desirable feature. You know, there are definitely some that are very much against on-chain governance. I think especially in the Ethereum community, I think Vitalik Buterin and Vlad Zamfir, you know, two examples, and that have argued a lot against on-chain governance. It's clear, I think, at this point that, you know, how to deal with exchanges is a big question around on-chain governance. We're going to come to the next point and kind of discuss in more detail, but which is basically on-chain vote buying. So I kind of come back to that, but this is sort of a, you know, theoretical issue. And I think an issue that we should think about in terms of liquid staking, but one that hasn't been, you know, hasn't been seen so far. And yeah, liquid staking is kind of, it's an open question how liquid staking and on-chain governance will affect each other. So I wanted to kind of come to a topic that's probably on people's minds, or has been on our mind a little bit when it comes to on-chain governance and liquid staking. And that's basically the question of, you know, does it make something like vote buying easier? And is that a problem? So first of all, on the topic of vote buying, if people haven't read this article, I highly recommend checking out. It's an article by Phil Dyan. He was a researcher at Cornell in Emin Günser's group. And he wrote this article around 2 years ago about vote buying in governance systems or blockchain governance systems. And, you know, his argument is basically that in any blockchain governance system, the issue is that when you vote, like the blockchain needs to be able to verify on chain how somebody voted. So you have cryptographic proof of the vote you did. And you can basically use that cryptographic proof also in order to prove to somebody else that you vote a certain way and thus get paid. So how would this work? For example, you know, let's say in Cosmos, a governance vote comes up, and, you know, I could go on Ethereum and I could create a smart contract on Ethereum that says anybody who votes for this proposal on Cosmos, just kind of, you know, submit your transaction as data to this Ethereum contract. You can prove that you voted yes. You can show your how many votes you've had, and, you know, I'm going to fund this Ethereum contract, smart contract with $1 million worth of ETH, and, you know, whoever votes in that way can basically, you know, collect the payment for that, and everyone who voted that way can get that payment. And you know, it's a very simple thing to do, and you could basically do that today, I think. Without making changes to Cosmos. You know, you could do it on another blockchain. You don't need IBC or anything like that, right? Because the people can just submit their transactions themselves. So it's, you know, it's pretty very much possible to do this today now. You know, Phil Dyan in the article, he goes into much more detail about, like, you know, different ways of doing this. And particularly, you could imagine having some sort of, you know, with zero knowledge proof, maybe you don't want that, like, you know, maybe you don't want that that you can afterwards see transparently who got bribed for their vote. So you could also down the line certainly do this in an anonymous way, right? So that you pay people for the vote, but nobody in the end knows who got bribed or not. So this is already possible, right? Like, so it's possible today. It will always be possible. I think it's basically impossible to prevent this, you know, for any blockchain. And so an interesting question is this a problem? And if it is a problem, does, you know, this liquid staking make it worse, or could it make it worse? So, and just to kind of sum up one more point on Phil Dyan's article, which is his conclusion in this article is that kind of all on-chain voting systems degrade to plutocracy. Now that sounds pretty bad, but it's interesting to ask, like, is it actually bad? Well, if you were trying to create a democracy on a blockchain, it's clearly bad, right? Because if you're trying to create a democracy, you want to have, 1,000 people and they all have like one person, one vote. Then if I can just go and buy all the votes, like that clearly undermines, the intention and the nature of the system. So if you have, for example, you combine some sense of like identity, and then have like a vote tied to each identity, then you could undermine that system with such a structure, and it's clearly corrupted, and it kind of devolves into something that it's not meant to be. But of course, it's interesting if you see the statement, right? Like all on-chain voting systems degrade to plutocracy, because one of the criticisms that various peoples have made of proof of stake and of proof of stake governance, like I think, for example, something like Flat Zamper's position, I would, as I understand it, would be that, well, you don't want on-chain governance on Ethereum, because then it would be something like plutocracy, because then you basically have the large ether holders that kind of control the voting process. So of course, the question, the kind of question that arises here is, well, if proof of stake governance systems are already basically plutocratic, that in basically that they explicitly say that staking tokens are a bit like ownership in a decentralized network, and we give votes according to ownership. So you could call that already kind of like a plutocracy, that then maybe it doesn't degrade anymore when you have vote buying. Maybe. I'm not sure on this. So I think that's something I would love to discuss today. But at least it's an interesting question. And of course, on-chain governance system, right? Something like Cosmos today, it's not like a democracy. Like it's not at all like a democracy. And it's actually much, much more similar to the governance process of a corporation, right? Where you can have, some people have a lot of shares, have a lot of votes. Some people have very few shares, have very few votes. So it's much, much more akin to a corporation's governance process. And it was actually interesting, sort of like, in preparing for this call and this discussion, I tried to read a little bit, like, so how is this handled in corporations? And what's interesting is that apparently it's not illegal to pay a shareholder to vote in a certain way. So there was this court case that was discussed in this Harvard Business Review, where I think it was HP or something like that or the management of HP paid some shareholders to vote in a certain way. Then there'll be a court case and basically sort of determine like if that's legal. But so it's an interesting question if if this is okay for shareholder shares, maybe it's okay too for proof of stake systems. Yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of a introduction to this. So I would say I would briefly kind of talk through some of the some of these topics that we could discuss here, and then I would say let's dive into discussion. But actually, first of all, let me pause for a second and ask. We've had a bunch of projects present in the last weeks on like different designs for liquid staking. And is anybody on the call that has worked on a particular design, or has a particular design in mind, and has kind of like thought through how governance rights would be managed in that design, and wants to kind of like spend a few minutes walking through that? Like Everett or anyone else is
Actually, there are some guys that are not part of the group, and I invited them. Akala.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Felix shared the thing, so I had a very brief look at it, but not in detail.
Okay, I had a couple of calls with them. They seem to have a pretty advanced design.
Okay.
But I don't know about the governance part.
Yeah.
I can speak a little bit for Everett. A lot of this is still under discussion, but right now we're still leaning towards giving the governance rights to whoever locks up the atom on the Cosmos blockchain, and not to the one that holds liquid staking. Obviously, there are ways to leverage governance votes using that mechanism, but fundamentally, we feel like you're still exposed to the atom position. So it shouldn't be as big of a problem since you are increasing your risk as well. But yeah, this is nothing final and this is still under discussion.
Hi, my name is Matt. So I wasn't there for the last call, so I can just add a couple of points. We work on Tezos as a chain for the liquid staking. So we're working on the governance at the moment. It is one of the biggest pain on making liquid staking possible because at the moment the voting is, based on the bakers. They're called stakers as bakers in Tezos. And you have this whole exchanges holding a lot of tokens. But then we are taking an approach of a meta delegation. So our system is set up a smart contract. It's called DAO Baker. So we're trying to get this governance in a different way, not going through the protocol level, but as a meta delegation, how to bring each slot by slot visibility, so you can actually see how these votes are going to be affect your voting, so you can actually shift from one provider to another provider within the network.
So do you mind just expanding like a tiny bit on this, what you mean with liquid staking that you're working on in Tezos?
So yeah, so we've released like a simple code and a little bit of a thesis like about a few days ago, last week. It's called DAO Baker. We created a set of smart contracts to take care of the whole monetary management of the baking process. So it's an automated baking process, right? And also the payouts, rewards, making much more transparency. So at the moment, you are relying on the staking provider to give you pro rata rewards, but then you don't know which roles are getting actually selected within that staking providers. So if you can make this whole thing programmatically, automated and through a set of smart contracts, then you can plug in with the liquid staking network from other chains as well. So one of the key things that we face the problem, the challenge that we see, liquid staking network, a lot of participants will be the new participants, they are not really well aware about how the governance process works, how the voting works in the proposal and things like that. Because a huge chunk of these participants will be the first time users of the network. So we need to give them a dashboard and how these things work and how their voting is getting tallied and who have this, what are the after effect of their voting things and things like that. But there'll be write-ups coming on next week, so that's what I'm not really expanding into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is the idea also to create some sort of like transferable assets for the security bonds?
No, at the moment it's just creating automated baking, and it's completely open sourced. It's there. I can drop the links to our group later on, so you can just go and check it out.
Okay. And just on the Everett side, I mean, one thing that is kind of interesting here, and I wonder if you guys thought about that too, because so let's say, right, so if you say in Everett, right, you put up atoms and then there's kind of liquid atoms that are issued, right? So you have this kind of like risky portion and then the non-risky portion.
Yep.
I mean, in a way, if you say the governance rights go with just the risky portion, I mean, that represents a much smaller kind of economic value than, you know, all the staked atoms today. So in a way, you do sort of reduce the amount of economic value that's participating in the governance process that way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The only thing is that since we are using an interchain account-based model, theoretically, we still have all the atoms technically under the control of the zone, and
Sure.
we could either so the good thing is that we can designate how we want to use these atoms in terms of governance, depending on our architecture. So we're not limited by the architecture itself. And another cool thing that we could see happening is where if we're trying to sell, you know, vote buying to the maximum, we could just create a DAO that just uniformly votes on behalf of the entire locked tokens. I'm not sure if that's a good idea, but that's also an option that I think we could see happening with more adoption of interchain accounts with voting DAOs across the interchain. So, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, with the interchain account thing, I know you guys are working on kind of a, you know, proposal and you know, upgrades for that. Is your idea for the interchain accounts that, you know, there will be, you know, kind of like full capability? So like, let's say you have an account on another chain, would be able to control, including like governance rights on the hub?
Yeah, the idea is to include governance as part of it, but it could actually be an upgrade feature later on after more fundamental research on vote buying and governance.
Yeah,
liquid staking has been done. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also a very interesting question. I'm curious what other people think on this, but because you could, I mean, one could of course also consider to say, okay, you know, you can move some things on another chain, right? So you can have an account on another chain that can, like, you know, stake the atoms on the hub and collect rewards and manage that, but that governance rights aren't allowed to kind of like move to another chain. Now, I'm not sure if that's a good idea, but I don't know. Does anybody have opinions on this?
Can you repeat the last you say about if you move atom, for example, to another chain?
Yeah.
That chain has right of vote in the hub, or the hub have right votes in the external chain?
Yeah, I mean, let's say, let's say something like the Everett model, where you have an account on, you know, Everett zone that controls some staked atoms on the hub, and you know, it can say withdraw rewards and delegate to a validator, and it can maybe redelegate. It could do a whole bunch of stuff, right? It can unbond, it can transfer to another account. Well, can it also vote in governance, right? Like, you know.
Okay, so let's imagine we forbid the governance votes across chains. So we forbid governance votes on staked DAO. Should we forbid voting on exchange voting too, like Binance voting or custodian votings or something like that? And if you do, I think we end up with just censorship. It's not something that's possible. So for the first question, I think yes, we should allow.
Yeah, I mean, of course, a good question, right? Because I mean, how can you?
This is very dangerous.
Voting? You can't, right?
If I understand it well about allow governance in the hub from external chains, this is very dangerous for the hub, because another people with another chain can.
The thing with the incentivized voting buying and controlling one's vote is that we can't really stop it. So there is always
I can control what other people are doing in other chains. For example, now Steam is take over all validators because they have the tokens, not because they can cross chains.
I think what you mean basically is that if there is another chain that is controlling the voting or the governance right of the hub, the security of the hub becomes at the same level than the security of the other chain, right?
Yes, exactly. It's doing all the token to the other chain. That's my point.
Okay.
So yeah, I can speak a little more in terms of my personal opinion in terms of this. In my personal opinion, I think as long as you need to have somewhat of a ownership of the atom. So basically there's that three function of the atom token, right? There's the staking function for security, and then there's the economic, like the value, and then there's the governance function. And essentially by liquid staking, you're able to separate some of these components into individual parts. What I think, and I don't speak perfectly on behalf of Everett because Ryan tends to disagree with me sometimes on the risks. As long as the value and the governance is linked, I think it is safe to assume that it is relatively safe, because for our goal is to kind of compete against like centralized takeovers of the blockchain itself. And as long as you have, it's essentially owning your atom is just locked up through another entity, which is decentralized, right? So I feel like whoever's posting the collateral should have the governance rights to that. Because essentially, if not, you could definitely buy, it's just the same thing as, having a locked up stake and shorting the atom token and then just voting with it, right? So like, I feel like there's a lot more centralized ways to approach vote buying. And I think even if it's suboptimal, it is better to offer more decentralized alternatives where there is transparency and you're not just selling the votes itself and not separate out of its that staking tokens value, if that makes sense.
Sorry. So as he said, if you want to separate the governance and the economic value, so would that be a threat? Like, then what is the incentive for a person not to give up the voting power if the economic weight will not transfer to no side?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you as well.
Can you hear me? So what I understood from what he the speech that you gave, you're separating the governance weight, the voting right, and the economic weight, like the value of the token. If that separation comes, wouldn't that be a threat for the network, because the voters will be more incentivized to give that vote for vote buying or something like that, because they can still keep the value of the token elsewhere, and most of the voters don't really, I don't know how many voters are really concerned about how these voting rights were being used as the network grows more and more.
I mean, I have
Also, excuse me, one question, it's quick. And in the hub, with the governance don't lock the tokens for any period of time. You just vote. When you vote on the hub, on the Cosmos, the atoms don't lock the period of time.
Victor, I think your connection's pretty bad. Maybe you turn off the video. You're cutting off a lot.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
1 second. Better now?
Let's try.
The tokens on the hub there is no lock it when you take one vote. You don't lock vote. You don't lock atoms when you make one vote.
Is that a question or?
No, I mean, if you don't lock the tokens when you make governance for some period of time, the people can take this for is allowing cross-chain voting, and the token is not locked for any period of time. In my opinion, is very dangerous. If people don't get, I can write on the chat.
Yeah, maybe you can write it on the chat. Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, just sort of one thought on my end from on the previous point. I think if we look at this from a high level, right? Like, let's say I have a certain amount of atoms, and you know, there's some voting rights associated with those atoms, and if I can basically sell the voting rights of those atoms. I mean, I don't want to sell the voting rights, or, you know, I don't want, if somebody pays me something for the voting rights, I don't want them to be used in a way that will decrease the value of the assets I have. You know, certainly not more than what I got paid for the voting rights. So I think that does provide a certain level of, like, you know, protection. So
it's more like an aligned interest.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, because I feel like the cost of buying votes might be different for like a community pool payout proposal and a software upgrade proposal, right? Because you know, if you think it'd be cheaper for you to buy votes to pass a community pool spend proposal, there are incentives to do that. Whereas for, you know, software upgrades, there might be less of an
when you buy a
right?
vote, you're buying a vote. I mean, you're not buying a specific vote. You're buying the right to vote. So you don't know.
Yeah, but for a given amount of time. So I'm just assuming if there are two different proposals.
But you could buy a
at
specific
separate
vote.
times.
Well, I mean, in general, if you have this separation, you're going to buy the voting right. If you're buying only a specific vote, it means that you need to add another layer just to buy one specific vote.
Not necessarily. I think you could absolutely do that. No, you could basically say, like, hey, anybody who votes this way, just give me proof and I'll pay you for that.
Yeah, where you're adding another layer. And you cannot just do it by separating the voting part of the atoms and the rest of it through a liquid staking mechanism. That's my point.
Yeah, but it seems like something that would be simple to do still. You could probably do it in a weekend.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's complex. I'm just saying you're adding another layer. But yeah, definitely.
So let me ask you, Brian said the one thing, like, you know, if a person want to sell the voting rights to somebody, and the person is very much concerned is that voting rights sale would diminish the value of the asset that he's holding or she's holding. So the question here is, like, from my side, like for Atom or any other token, right? Let it be agnostic. How much does a normal users have knowledge about what is it getting voted for, and using that voting, the voting power that you're giving? How much they have all this knowledge about what is going on in the governance process?
Well, I mean, if you look at the reality, right, of you know, Cosmos or Tezos or any of these systems, I mean, and of the governance mechanism in particular, it doesn't matter actually, right? Because you have one coin, one vote. So, like, somebody who has like 100 atoms, 1,000 atoms, or something like that, it basically has almost no influence on this thing, right? So you are going to have like very large holders that will end up having, you know, most of the influence on the decision making. And, you know, are they going to be concerned about, you know, what is the impact of a particular vote, and like be very cautious that something doesn't happen that will end up having a long-term negative effect on the token value? Yeah, I think so. So I'm not sure. Like somebody who like buys a few coins and today and sells them tomorrow on Binance, they don't know and they don't care, but they also don't particularly matter in this case.
Right. That's really an excellent way to point out that. But the thing it is, when we designing a liquid staking network, what we're doing is like we're making that economic the yield is much more delivered to the users in a much more better way rather than the traditional go and stake it as each and every network. So when we're doing this, there will be definitely some kind of disparity, when the same the coin is being used for the voting, and then so the imbalance comes like when you're actually taking more yield out of the staking rewards, but then are you the real person that I can trust on the governance rights that I can give it to you?
Didn't fully understand your point here.
So for the liquid staking networks, you will have mix and match.
What do you mean with what is a liquid staking network? What do you mean when you say that?
If you can switch the networks, especially in liquid staking networks, like if you have,
I don't know what a liquid staking network is.
That's one problem that is in the Tezos community. There is a problem of definition of liquid staking and what is liquid staking network.
Right.
So better remove this one and speak overall about the network.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we have a lot of this nomenclature in disparity between the blockchains. Yeah. It took me a big learning curve to learn a lot of things about Tezos.
I mean, you had questions or maybe remarks. You can say them, but it's just that liquid staking doesn't mean anything in general in this context. Matt.
Yeah, so I'm more what Brian said is correct. Apparently you have the big whales like exchanges accumulating a lot of tokens. They have more weightage and voting, but comparatively to that, a small user voting is not really a big voice or making not a big impact, right? But if you have system like which have more decentralization comes with all this new way of rewards, would that mean that more and more users will go towards this big exchanges where they can provide much better UX and, as a matter of convenience if they don't really care about it? Isn't it really good way to governance to give them some kind of accountability, even though the vote is 1 or 10 or a million? That is being casted for a purpose they do really care about it?
I think that's a choice that whoever holds the token should be able to make. And it's kind of like the whole preferred shares, common shares. And if they only care about the economic value of the token, and they could care less about the governance rights, I don't know why we need to stop them from doing it, because I feel like everyone's, eventually someone's going to come up with a mechanism to bypass it.
Regarding voting, I think that with the liquid staking, I think that it should be different on different blockchains because they have different security assumptions and make different decisions. So, for example, in Tezos, I think you can sell your coins right after you vote, and you don't have to bear the consequences, long-term consequences for the price. And in Cosmos, your tokens are locked for a month. So liquid staking for Tezos could absolutely let people vote with liquid staking immediately because it doesn't change the assumptions of the protocol. And in Cosmos, allowing liquid stake to vote and then sell your liquid stake immediately means that you're making security worse for Cosmos. So it's
at the same
one.
Yeah, at the same time, I mean, there's a question for me here. Like, let's say I have now this liquid stake, right, in Cosmos, and I'm voting in a way that is detrimental to the health of the network. Well, I still have to I have to control that stake, and I have to vote in a way that's detrimental to the network, and then I can go sell it. Well, I mean, if I'm like if I sort of increase the probability in that, in the meantime, for my vote until I can sell it, right? Because obviously they have to happen in that order. Then I should pay the economic cost for that, right? So it's not like a free lunch. I mean, it's not any. I mean, I think previously there was, the excellent point that, well, I can also go. I can hold some atoms. I can short the same amount of atoms on Binance or something, and I could vote. And well, I don't have the price exposure then either, right? So I don't really see how it makes it any worse.
The process of shorting involves also borrowing the atoms, selling them in the market, etc., etc. So it's not also that easy to just have atoms, short them, vote, and have an effect on the market.
Yeah, but similarly, if I put up some proposal that's obviously bad for Cosmos, and I'm voting for that, and then I rush and try to sell my liquid coin, well, I've voted for that, right? So I mean, this can easily backfire, right? And in the moment from when I voted that, I mean, assuming you have a large position that really could influence the vote, well, probably you could easily drive the price down, right? By the time you voted for that. So does that really work? I don't really see it.
Even when you're selling your coins, you're going to be driving. I mean,
yeah, you're going to be driving doubly down, maybe. Yeah.
So you're going to go through an accumulation period in order to have enough coins, and then you need to sell them in a short amount of time. So I mean, there were discussions about this in the Telegram group, and the full the case that was interesting was the flash loan one. Like if we were able to make a very large flash loan, vote, and then and short at the same time.
Yeah, if you can literally not hold the coin at all, right? then it's sort of a free thing-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, but even for this one, basically you're going to be able to do your vote for one block, and then someone or the other people who have the original coins will be able to revert the vote.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
So even in this case, it doesn't really work.
Regarding the shorting atom on Binance argument, thing is, if you're making a really bad decision, that's obviously bad for Cosmos. You can't. You should have a lot of vote for that to pass. So let's say I don't know, a third, 2/3, depending on how many people are voting for that too. But I mean a lot, and you can't just
you can't short that much.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You can't do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Yeah. Just another sort of point here. I also think, let's say we think of a model like delegation vouchers, where we have, basically atoms that get staked on the hub. We have some voucher that represents a claim on those tokens. That voucher can be moved to a different chain. Then one question is, should it be able to vote kind of from that other chain? I mean, I guess this question is how would this work technically? But at least economically, I mean, I think it should be possible. It would be desirable if it was possible, because it does mean you allow more economic value to participate in governance still. And if you don't allow that, you're actually decreasing participation as well. But I see Sunny is also here. Do you want to share really what are your thoughts on how you think governance should work with maybe with any of these liquid staking approaches in general, or with something like delegation vouchers in particular?
Not sure. I don't really have any. In general, I think that people should be locked up after voting, and so after you make a vote, your voucher should be actually become illiquid until the period of the unbonding period. But how? I don't know. I mean,
but that's not really. I mean, that would mean forcing people to move it back to the hub or something. I mean, otherwise you can't enforce. Or like, how would you do that practically?
right. To be honest, I think most people are just going to delegate their voting to other entities anyway. So, I mean, I have a feeling that the people who are actually holding using the liquid staking derivatives are not going to be people who are super active in governance anyways. Those derivatives are probably just going to be delegated. Those voting rights are just going to be delegated to someone. And the case that you have to really worry about is someone using it maliciously on purpose, right? It's like someone just buys a bunch of liquid staking derivatives to influence governance votes, and then does some bad governance decision and then sells them immediately afterwards. So that's the case that we really have to worry about, I think.
Yeah, but again, I guess that's sort of just what we talked about through before. It's a little bit hard to see how that would actually, I guess we weren't. It doesn't seem like we were able to come up with a scenario that actually sounded plausible of that happening. Or do you see one?
No, I mean, this is sort of a problem with all on-chain voting that uses a token, right? It's like people have done this on Aragon as well, where they just bought a bunch of Aragon tokens to influence a vote and then sold them immediately afterwards.
Oh, really? I didn't.
Yeah, I believe so.
But it surprises me, because Aragon still, right? I mean, it's not a particularly liquid thing, and you would have to probably buy.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be an expensive operation to pull off.
Yeah.
Although I guess they haven't had great participation. I think in Aragon,
No.
I know in some of the votes, right, they've had very, very small number of percentage of stake participating. So maybe then it can work, right? But in something like Cosmos, if you have 70%, if the validators inherit the votes of delegated to them, and I think that wouldn't change in those designs, then this is just too expensive to do.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe that's a reasonable enough solution where we by having you auto delegate to your voting power, as long as we get voter turnout, voter participation high enough, then maybe it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And traditionally in Cosmos, voter participation has been reasonably very high.
Yeah, and I think this is going to stay like that, right? Because validators will continue to participate in this. So, I mean,
yeah.
I guess I don't know if it is worth speaking about the whole topic of exchanges participating in governance. I don't know if I know there was this Steemit and Tron and Binance thing. I know, Felix, are you able to give a sort of 3 or 5 minute summary of what happened there, or somebody else maybe?
Yeah, I can try. I also just read a few articles, but maybe I can do it. So basically, in Steemit, you also have some type of on-chain governance based on these, they call it witnesses, which is kind of let's just say that's validators, and the token holders vote for who these witnesses are. Then now recently, basically Justin Sun bought that company behind Steemit, and then the Steemit community, there is some kind of a pool of funds that was is usually there to kind of develop the ecosystem or something, and they were afraid that Just the Sun wants to like take control of these funds, and they basically wanted to remove that out of the system, or like kind of make it unable to vote with this kind of funds. And then basically Justin Sun claimed, oh, these are hackers that want to like hack the chain, but these were basically the community members before he came in. And so he says, oh, there's an attack on Steemit hackers, and kind of convinced 3 large exchanges, I think Binance, Poloniex, and Huobi, to basically vote with their Steemit tokens other witnesses into the council, or whatever you want to call it. So basically that they can stop this fork. Then obviously that kind of created this backlash, because basically the exchanges voted on behalf of their customers. And so in the end, the Binance kind of paddled back and issued this apology letter and said, oh, they're going to stay neutral in governance, and they thought it's just like a normal soft fork upgrade. But so I'm not sure who's on the right side here. So basically they were under the impression there is some attack and they need to defend it, but at the same time it kind of shows, okay, they were able to influence this governance process just through like activating 3 exchanges that were holding a lot of tokens, and the actual Steemit community was kind of outvoted by that. Is that if anyone else knows about this, is that kind of correct?
There were also like proposals in order to stop the exchanges from voting and these kinds of things. So the Steemit community was pretty reactive on this.
And then and a few things to add about this context is the coin was like ninja mined by the company. So like prior to the community joining, which was a big issue. And then the hard fork that the original Steemit witnesses.
It was ninja mined?
So like, it was just like, it was mined before everyone else started becoming validators on the Steemit chain, witnesses on the Steemit chain. So basically they just pre-mined a bunch of tokens without letting other people know. Yeah.
But who did this?
Like Steemit, the company.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what they wanted to remove with this fork, but basically
and not just the vote, but also the send ability. And then another interesting key point is that for Steemit, 1 token, you're allowed to vote for up to 30 witnesses. So you can vote for multiple entities with 1 token, which I think is a different dynamic than, you can only designate 1 validator. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's also something, I mean, this kind of points to an example of a kind of on-chain governance, I would say, kind of like bribery gone wrong thing that I read about in the past, which was Lisk. And so Lisk had a similar system where, I have a token and I can vote for validators in Lisk. And I can also vote for 50 different 100 different validators, basically. I think they had around 100 validators. And, it's all on chain, right? You can see what happens on chain. And then I think they had a system with rewards that's a bit like Tezos, right? Where basically I think the rewards go to validators, and then the validators can sort of choose what to pay. And so I think what they did there was they basically kind of created this big cartel, and they said, so this cartel had 60 validators in the cartel. And so we would be like, hey, if you want to get rewards, you have to vote for all 60 of us. If you vote for just 1 or 2, then, we get to vote, but you don't get any rewards. So you had this basically see, and then the thing was that I think if you voted for someone else, then you wouldn't get rewards. So it was a very broken system, but it ended up basically with a mechanism where you have just these 2 cartels that control all of the validator slots. But yeah, I think this was just poorly designed, and in a system like Cosmos or Tezos, I don't see this as a risk of happening.
So I have a question. So
Yeah.
I think liquid staking is building a layer on the Cosmos Hub, also on governance too. So I think that makes each liquid staking solution having some kind of manipulation power on governance of the Cosmos Hub. If holders are too dependent on the system, so is it a possible risk?
Well, what's the risk you're afraid of? Well, like, what is the scenario that you think could happen that would be undesirable?
So on each solution, there will be a protocol to process the governance vote from holders, and then those rules will be decided from each of the network, not from Cosmos Hub. So it's not controlled by Cosmos Hub, but each network will decide the decision. So they can manipulate the rules about governance voting, something like you said about steaming. So that will make Cosmos Hub maybe less stable, or like or not there in their intention. So that's one of the things I was thinking about Interchain account, because always Cosmos does not want to have any like smart contracting utility on the hub, because they don't want to make it too complicated. But Interchain account is it's like a more liberal smart contract utility. So
Right.
that ultimately make the Cosmos Hub controlled by layer. So that's a very tricky thing for Cosmos Hub to allow. So that can be a I think design decision for the hub.
Yeah, I mean, let me sort of take the counter position to this, and you know, I was just sort of a little bit maybe a efficient market, free market type position, which is that, you know, let's say you have the Cosmos Hub, and now we have different zones, you know, where some basically stake gets concentrated for, you know, whatever reason. Let's say Everett, because they have this like liquidity thing, and there's something else, you know, and you know, there's some whatever 10% of atoms are in Everett, some atoms are in somewhere else, and I mean, they can do whatever they want, right? In terms of like, how is it determined that the system ends up voting on the Cosmos Hub? But you know, if you know, so if 10% of atoms are in Everett, right, that means basically people with exposure to 10% of the economic value, like a lot of economic exposure to Cosmos, are, you know, relying on that system. I mean, they wouldn't rely on that system if that system produced kind of negative outcomes for the Cosmos Hub that undermined the very asset that is in there, right? So I think in a way you do have this kind of control mechanism that, you know, atoms are going to go and accumulate, and those economic values are going to be in places, you know, only if they are not negative to the value of the system. And if they are, then you would assume that the coins are going to leave that. Do you think that makes sense, or do you disagree?
Yeah, so I think holders will choose those kind of service because of convenience at first, but after that, they will be too dependent economically with this service, so that they cannot came out from those service. So that's kind of a same problem from centralized exchange too, I think. So Yeah, but I think that's a subjective area. But governance problem also implies this kind of risk. Yeah, general risk.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point, right? It's a good point.
Can I just add one? I have to bounce out really quick, but I just want to add one quick thing, which is what I think a technical change that can be made that can help improve this situation is, all these exchanges and stuff, we should make it a norm so that they're supposed to let their users pass on governance rights to their users, allow their users to vote using the atoms that are on their thing. And same thing for interchain accounts. But the problem is right now, there's no way of one account splitting its vote. And so Binance can just say, oh, we can't do that because, all of our atoms are sitting on our one account. And so, we have to vote one way or the other. And, we had this issue in AIB as well. We have a lot of atoms. We can only vote yes or no using it. It'll be nice if what we can do is on chain, we can say, okay, we make a vote with 67% saying yes and 33% saying no, or 55% saying yes, 30% saying abstain, 10% saying no, or something like that. So that way, at least gives a technical way for these interchain, these things. I don't know what we should come up with a term for these, but it's the idea of many users storing balances in a single account, and so at least providing a way for them to split those governance votes apart.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a fantastic change. Absolutely, I think that would be a great idea. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess one would see if exchanges will actually end up doing it, but at least they could.
Yeah, at least then they don't have an excuse to say that it's oh, technically not possible.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I think that would be desirable change to make. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's also very relevant. I mean, let's say you have some sort of DAO that is going to end up, controlling 1 million atoms and some other chain, and it's collectively owned by various people. Again, they can have their DAO decision process for deciding how to vote, but that might well entail that, there's various constituencies in that DAO, and they also end up splitting the vote, right? Because they want to say, oh, 40% say yes, 60 no, something like that. And that's also something that wouldn't be, so it's not just exchanges, but also DAO-like structures that would want something like that.
Yeah, totally. We want this within AIB, where it's not everyone in AIB wants to, we don't want to use all of our 10% to vote one way if people within the company disagree.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that would be desirable. Let's see if there's anything else to yeah, I mean, there is a question on, I think this is an idea in Polkadot, and I'm personally the idea of kind of if you vote on the governance, you have to do some sort of lockup of the tokens. And maybe that there's you commit to a longer lockup, you have more governance rights. Do people have opinions on that? Pro or con?
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, so there are some ideas around how governance rights, an idea around governance rights. Actually, I think it goes kind of counter to the liquid staking direction. But let's say if you say okay, user A has 10 tokens and user B has also 10 tokens, and there's a governance vote coming up. If you say user A, or if user A says along with his vote, he also commits to kind of, locking up the token for 6 months. but user B doesn't do that. That then user A gets like many more votes because they kind of commit more to the system. So that
this is the Polkadot system.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see why it goes against liquid staking or liquid tokens.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily incompatible, but I think it's something that favors, again, the pooling of capital, right?
Yeah.
Because like an exchange for an exchange is like very easy. If Binance has like a balance of 10 million dots, and there's always 5 million that are in the exchange, and some will go out, some will go in. It doesn't cost them anything to take like 5 million of the coins and say, okay, they stay here for a year at least. But for an individual user directly holding tokens, well, that's very expensive, right? So I think it again kind of tends to favor exchanges potentially, and it's much cheaper for exchange to commit to some lockup like that than it is for somebody who self-custodies.
But if you think of liquid staking, let's say if there is the possibility to stake dots through a system that issues liquid tokens, you can end up in a position where you can end up in a position when you're in a better position than Binance.
Yeah,
you can lock up everything for 6 months. It's there. I need to look at, maybe we need to see how redelegation works on Polkadot. But if you...
But then wouldn't the system also be useless if that is possible?
Why?
It's longer lockup, because then everyone would choose the maximum lockup, sell the derivative, right? Like no one would go for a lower lockup.
Exactly. Well, I think this is what is expected to be done on Polkadot. And I think also this is why the other guys at Akala are building the liquid staking part of it.
Yeah.
Basically, everyone is going to be, the dots are going to be staked, and everyone is going to be using the liquid dots. You can call them with this, yeah.
But that would be a problem. I guess maybe this is like something the Polkadot guys should figure out, because I don't know if they want it like this.
Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, in Polkadot, you also have this council thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, Polkadot changes their words from there. Yeah, it's certainly a complicated system. I think that's very true. And it's not always easy to understand how exactly it works. Anything else to cover on the topic of governance?
One risk that, sorry. One risk that I see is really once we start using other chains for liquid staking, it's really the dependency that it creates between Cosmos Hub and other zones. In the case of Cosmos Hub, at least, Cosmos Hub and other zones that might be more prone to an attack.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's absolutely the case, right? Like it is opening. I mean, liquid staking is opening up the design space, the space of freedom, right? Also the degree of interconnectedness and interdependence. Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, it's an inevitable thing. It's a positive thing in many ways, in that I think it unleashes like a huge amount of possible innovation. But of course, it's also like, risky in a way, because, what do people do with all this stuff? Who knows, right? You don't know. I think it's, I guess in my view, risk worth taking, no? I mean, you know, stuff like Unsplash, like what you guys are doing, right? Like you can then build and like.
Well, it creates another risk that we can protect.
Sure, exactly, right. Right, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, it's good for us, but still the risk is there.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, I think in the end, isn't that what also blockchain is about? To like allow permissionless innovation and have the conviction that
I agree.
Good things would come out of that. I mean, if you want to have a centrally managed lockdown control system, yeah, I mean, that's, I guess that can also be fine, but it's, I think on our end, the idea that like enabling the kind of rapid innovation that we're seeing in DeFi and Ethereum, in Cosmos, across chain and around proof of stake, you know, is overall net desirable. But of course, it doesn't mean there are no risks and that some things won't go wrong. All right, then anything else here? Or should we start to wrap up?
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure if it's too philosophical, but there is, so another angle to look at on-chain governance and voting is the like contentions it might cause, and like the way it affects the way it affects the ecosystem. Like imagine the corporations, like there are things in the corporational world like hostile takeovers, split ups. Having coin voting opens up this whole world of adversarial behavior and manipulation, and I just want to make sure when we consider on-chain voting for a certain blockchain like Cosmos or Ethereum or Polkadot, do we make a distinction of the target of those like networks? Like Ethereum, I think from the very beginning was targeting to be an all-encompassing smart contract platform. Cosmos came after that. It wants to be like an interchain. Polkadot also wants to, you know, through Substrate also wants to be more like an underlying layer rather than the like super chain about all chains. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like, do we make a distinction of the role of governance between this like super chain at the level of the super chain versus different chains, like the sub chains that somehow are connected to that, like, yeah.
I mean, certainly it's true, right, that different chains have different, different objectives. And that might mean they want different types of governance processes. I mean, a great example of this is Region Network. So Region Network, is working on this kind of blockchain for environmental sustainability. And they want to have, stakeholders that participate in governance process that, aren't normally like crypto token holders. So, like people owning like land and, farmers and stuff like that. So, they have a whole kind of ideas around how to do that. Now, I think most of the networks have a more, crypto, it's just like hyper-capitalist approach where, well, it's like one coin, one vote, and it's, I guess on the Ethereum side, probably there has been like this philosophy that, there are stakeholders like developers and users that don't necessarily have tokens, and they have to also be sort of represented. And so I think that's one of the reasons why they're against coin voting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky question.
Like people imagine different orders of magnitude in which blockchains might find use. And is Cosmos doesn't have the level of like governance like Polkadot has now yet, right?
Well, Polkadot has no governance yet. No, it's not
I was looking at Kusama, so I'm all confused by all these different projects. But
Kusama is basically like Polkadot testnet.
Testnet,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, Polkadot system certainly, I think, more complicated in Cosmos, right? They have some sort of council also, where I guess you kind of elect almost like a board for Polkadot, but I'm not totally sure how Polkadot's governance works.
I just want to make the point that if like we are talking about Cosmos, like with liquid staking, if Cosmos wants to be at a higher level and not just like above like chains, then on-chain governance might pose like risks in terms of, yeah, that's the only thing I want to voice out.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, definitely one thing we'll do, I would say, next week or so is finish up maybe the governance. There's going to be a section in the research paper on governance, so maybe we can finish that up and or like finish the draft up and then share for review here as well and for input. Yeah. And Brendan, do you want to?
Yeah, just wrap up.
Sort of wrap up.
Sure. Yeah. So as Brian said, like we will have the first draft of the document out by the end of the month. So the next call is on the 25th of March. So around that call, we'll try and get the draft out to you. Whether we have a chance to go into it on the next call or not, I'm not too sure. Next call, we're certainly going to have Marwan's going to present Unsplash. So very interested to hear about that. He's been very opinionated on the call so far. So now he gets a chance to explain what he's working on. So that should be great. And then I think if there's any other suggestions for the next call, do let us know. Join in the Telegram group and make some suggestions. We are exploring a few different things. We're just reaching out to a few other people that we think might be interesting, but I don't want to commit to anything yet. Is there anything else that people would like to hear on the next call?
Maybe the Staffy model as well.
Yeah, Staffy's still lined up. I'll check back with Liam and see where he is with his deck. So yes, that might be one that's interesting.
Oh,
certainly the Sakala thing sounds very interesting as well.
Yeah, and maybe just one more thing. So we did recently speak like a few calls ago, and various people expressed desire to have some sort of regulatory coverage. So we will have that as part of the research paper. So we have Gabe Shapiro, who's like excellent lawyer. He wrote our terms of service, so he's already very familiar with Cosmos staking, and he's been kind of at the forefront of lots of things. So we will kind of include a brief regulatory coverage in the research paper. And we can potentially also have a call with Gabe at some point. But I would say probably we'll do that more towards the end. But yeah, so I think we can probably at least cover that in the research paper as as a section, and then I think at some point we can have a call. Maybe he can kind of walk through the section and his thoughts on that, and then we can also address any questions anybody has about maybe their different designs and what that would look like.
That's cool. Honestly, it's very interesting.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, we'll leave it there. So yeah, just jump in on Telegram if there's anything else you'd like to add, and we can line something up. But otherwise, thanks again. Thanks for everyone attending this week, and
thank you guys.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. See you next